Today's a pretty interesting topic because we're taking some of the things that we have learned from this chapter and we're tying it into actually something interesting. All right. What I mean by that, well, before I get to the interesting stuff, we've got to review this stuff because it'll make sense. The whole chapter has been focused on this picture. Okay. This is basically the cell. This represents the cell cycle. Remember, all living organisms are made up of cells, okay, including us. We have a lot of them. Every cell, most cells, will undergo a cycle where they spend a majority of the time just being a cell. That's called interphase. Time for growth, the time for preparation. Something very important does happen in this phase called DNA replication. But for the most part, it's really very much like a non-dividing portion of the cell. Okay, it's called interphase. On Friday, you guys did a lab where you were looking under the microscope at onion cells, onion root tips. And basically, you should have noticed, and you did from your data that I saw, that most of the cells you were looking at under the microscope were actually in interphase. Remember, that was the phase where you can't even really see the genetic material very well. You can't see it condensed as chromosomes. It's there, it's just not really visible. Okay, then you should also know that at some point in that cell's life, it's going to decide to divide, most cells. Talk about that today. Most cells will undergo cell division, and it's a two-part process. Part one, mitosis. Remember what mitosis is. It's just division of the genetic material. Part two, cytokinesis. Actually splitting the cell into two. Okay. We focused a lot on mitosis in this chapter because it's kind of complicated. You should remember that you should know the phases of mitosis. They should be very, very, very clear to you. When I think of mitosis, the first thing that comes into my brain is that right there, PMAP. And you should know what the P stands for, you should know what the M stands for, you should know what the A stands for, and you should know what the T stands for. You should not only know that, but you should know what the cell looks like at each of these phases. And that's something we've already covered, and I'm not going to review in major detail. Actually, I will review here quickly with a different picture that you might not have seen. But that's mitosis. That is division of the genetic material. All right, well then once a cell makes a new cell, it's going to start this process all over again. Okay. Mitosis, as a review. Again, I want you guys to really understand what happens at each of the 4 stages of mitosis. PMAP, P, prophase, M, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, you get it. You should understand how the chromosomes look during each of these phases. You should understand what they're doing in each of these phases of mitosis. Okay. Again, easy stuff. Awesome. Don't lose sight of the big picture when it comes to a cell dividing by mitosis. Let me kind of do this way. What I mean by that is, if I would tell you that a cell is going to divide by mitosis and cytokinesis, you absolutely, this should already be in your notes, you should absolutely know that you are making a new cell, which they term daughter cells. You're making daughter cells that are genetically identical. In other words, you're making cells that are the same as the parent cell. You should also know, not only is it identical, but those daughter cells will have the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. You're making a twin. You're making a twin cell. You absolutely have to have that fully ingrained in your mind. Mitosis makes daughter cells that are genetically identical to the parent, and they have the same number of chromosomes. The same cell, but think about it. It makes sense. You know, I'm losing skin cells right and left. So are you guys. Skin cells are so, they grow rapidly. They go around this circle really quickly, skin cells do. We are constantly sloughing off skin cells. We're constantly getting boo-boos, okay? Or we need to repair them. I don't know about you, but when my body wants to make a new skin cell, I really hope it looks like the skin cell that it came before it, or else I'd be really in trouble. Those are what I mean. So it's very important to understand the types of cells that undergo mitosis. When you make a cell, you want it to be identical to the cell it came from. Just like I want my skin cells to be identical to the skin cells that came before it. Now, the reason I'm harping so much on this is next chapter, we're going to talk about a process that has some similarities to mitosis, but very different. So I don't want you to confuse the two steps. So ingrain this in your memory. Mitosis makes twins, cells that are identical to the parent cells, cells with the same number of chromosomes. When it comes to that other word, meiosis, which I know you've all heard of, completely different. It does not do any of this. So some of the steps look a little familiar, but they do not turn out identical. So, all right. Today is kind of wrapping up then chapter 10. Wrapping up chapter 10, and I want to talk about how the cell cycle is regulated. Okay, that's a big word, but this is what that means. So regulating the cell cycle. And up here I have written down skin cells are going to go through the cell cycle fast. Liver cells, not so fast. They both go through the cell cycle, and they go through the same steps, G1, S, G2, but skin cells, because they are rapidly dividing cells, we need them to be, go through the cell cycle really quickly. Believe it or not, humans have certain cells that don't even undergo cell division at all. Namely, your muscle and your nerve cells. In other words, what you're born with is what you're stuck with for life. Treat them with love. Yeah. It's odd. Not all cells are the same. You know, and I'm just talking humans, but this applies to all organisms in biology. Not all cells are the same. We don't want them to be. So there's one word I want you guys to know. I'm not going to get in a ton of detail, but I want you to understand that word cyclin, okay? There's a special substance called cyclin. It's a protein. Remember, we were just big bags of protein? Well, one of those proteins that our cell manufactures is called cyclin, and for good reason. Because this protein is going to control the rate at which that a cell is going to move around the cell cycle. When cyclin starts to accumulate, that basically sends a signal for mitosis to begin. Okay, so literally there is a substance that's made in our cells that when it's in really large quantities, it basically is like a ding, 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 like a signal for that cell to undergo division. Simple as that. Hey, that's why it gets its name. The name cyclin. When you think of cyclin, you think of something kind of cycling. The reason it's got its name is because at times cyclin levels are high, times cyclin levels are low. The cyclin protein cycles between high and low numbers. That's where it gets its name from. So anytime you know that cyclin is if you have a lot of cyclin inside a cell, that's like a dead giveaway that cell's about to undergo cell division. Okay. And that's all I'll say about that. There's one other word I actually want to talk about. Well, before I talk about that word, you got to see this picture again. I can't show this picture enough. If you look at and really understand this picture, you understand that cells don't typically die very often. You know, I call it a cell cycle, not a life cycle of a cell. It's different. A cell cycle, a typical cell is going to actually divide, grow up, and then divide again, and then grow up, and then divide again. Cells don't go through life and then die, then die, then die. We wouldn't live nearly as long as we do if that was the case. So it's really important to see that the cell cycle involves growth and then division, and then more growth, and then more division, replace, repair, all that. However, there are times where you want your cells to die. You're like, really? Yes. And they give that a really cool word, apoptosis. I love that word. It's one of the best words in science. Apoptosis, programmed cell death. And you're thinking to yourself, why in the world would I want one of my cells to die? On purpose, for a good reason. Anybody think of any? I mean, why would you want a cell to die? Yeah, absolutely. Reason number one, listen to this. You know, there's a lot going on inside your cell, and to be honest, your cells aren't perfect. There's going to be boo-boos. Every once in a while, a cell is just going to kind of break down. When I say break down, I'm basically saying that, you know, the DNA inside of a cell, remember that's the control center. You have your nucleus contains your DNA. That's like controls everything about that cell. You got to understand, DNA can be pretty fragile. If the DNA gets damaged, it's not going to work right. It's not going to do very good things for that cell. But here's the cool thing. Most organisms have kind of a system of checks and balances in place. If they notice that a cell is broken, that cell is going to get a death warrant issued on it. Okay, quiet please. That cell is going to get a death warrant issued on it. And literally the death warrant comes in the form of a chemical messenger. We're not worried about that. But literally that cell will be programmed to die. That's called apoptosis. So yes, I'll be honest, there's actually probably, I think cancer rates would be much higher if apoptosis didn't occur to break down some of those cells that would normally kind of get a little out of control. Hey, there's other reasons you want apoptosis to occur inside of you. When you guys are an embryo, when you guys start off as just a few cells, for example, obviously those few cells are going to turn into more, which are going to turn into more, and then eventually you've seen the pictures of a fetus inside of a womb. It's pretty cool looking. But if you've ever really focused on those pictures, you'll notice that, especially, I think it's around the maybe 20-week mark, like when you're 20 weeks in the womb, pay attention to the hands and feet. What do our hands and feet look like around 15 to 20 weeks? Yeah, they're all webbed. We look like ducks. All right. Literally, our fingers aren't digits. They have skin in between them. On both sides, so they're actually kind of web-like. Oh, that would look kind of funny. Apoptosis actually occurs naturally in human development later in pregnancy, and it sends a death signal to those cells in between the digits, and they basically go away. So then it forms your digits. Every once in a while it doesn't work. You'll notice there are some humans, my cousin was born like this, your fingers are kind of born. Or your toes. Or your toes are born, they're kind of still webbed together. You had to get surgery to kind of remove them. Kelsey. Did you know someone too? Kelsey. Oh, did she? Cool. Yeah, cool. It's actually pretty common. And that just basically means that apoptosis was supposed to go on there and it just didn't. So they just have to kind of surgically remove them. My cousin was the same way. All right, huh? That would hurt. You know, I asked her and she said, no, it didn't hurt. They just are there. And I think, do you know when Kelsey had the surgery? Was she older?
She still has it.
Does she really?
It's on her toes.
Okay, cool. I don't think it doesn't hurt, or I don't think it's like bothersome in any way from what I understand. But, by the way, right now there's some serious apoptosis going on outside our windows with all the leaves that are falling off the trees. How do you think leaves fall off the trees? There's actually a real specific place at basically where the stem meets the tree, where the leaf is. There's actually cells, and basically there's a real small group of cells. Apoptosis kind of occurs in that really small area to knock that leaf off the tree. So there's another good reason you'd want apoptosis to occur. Remember, it's good for a tree to lose its leaves. You know, winter's coming. Those trees out there, it's, you know, during the winter where temperatures are cold and there's, you know, there's sun, but it's just the temperatures are so cold, all those enzymes that normally would work to carry out photosynthesis just aren't working right. It doesn't make any sense for a tree, for some trees, to keep their leaves. It's a waste of energy.
Fun drinking.
It's a waste of energy. So, hello. Yes.
Calm me down, calm me down.
Okay,
calm me
thanks,
down.
Kathy. Bye-bye. Courtney, if you just leave at 2:30. Don't even raise your hand or anything.
You what?
Okay. Anyway, so these are good reasons. Apoptosis doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. If the program is, or if a cell is programmed to die, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay. However, we kind of mentioned it here. Now this brings us to the cancer talk. What do you guys think cancer is? What are your thoughts on cancer? Do you know anybody with cancer, and what does that mean? Yeah, Kirsten, what does that mean if you have cancer?
It's just like a mutated cell that just keeps multiplying and multiplying, and the other cells can't stop it just because, like, it doesn't pretend to be like a different kind of cell until it gets anything in there. It takes over and multiplies.
Cool. How did I talk about this already, or did you read up or something, or do you know?
No, I think you talked about it. I can't remember.
We might have. No, but that's good. Very good. Actually, perfect. A lot of people think that cancer is like a cell that's a diseased, or if you have like a bacteria inside of you. It's not that at all. Cancer is, it's kind of strange to think of cancer as basically, when you think of cancer, I want you guys to think of this picture. Because like I just said, normally a cell is kind of pre-programmed to hit each of these phases at a certain time. And it either goes fast or slow depending on the cell, but it's kind of programmed. A cell that has cancer, a cancerous cell, and it really only takes one to start off with, is a cell that's basically lost the ability to control how fast it goes through the cell cycle. So just like Kirsten said, the cell basically divides faster than it should. And that's not good. Because what ends up happening is you get this big mass of cells where they shouldn't be. What's that big mass of cells called, guys?
Don't know.
A tumor.
Oh.
The technical definition of cancer is just uncontrolled cell growth. Basically, a cell that's gone out of control. If a cell goes out of control when it comes to its cycle, cell cycle, it's going to build up and build up and build up, and lots of cells and lots of cells and lots of cells, and that's exactly what a tumor is. Those cells aren't necessarily dead. They're not at all. They're there, they're functioning, they're trying to operate the right way, but there's just a lot of them. There are a lot of cells in a place that there shouldn't be a lot of cells. And then your first thought is, okay, well then big deal. Okay, so I have a few more cells in this, then a little patch over here of cells that shouldn't be there. Why is that a big deal? Here's the problem. 3 major things can happen when you get a tumor. Tumors have the ability to absorb a lot of nutrients from the other cells around it that need it. In other words, remember, we've been talking about cells need a constant supply of ingredients to efficiently work. They need glucose. They need oxygen. They need water. They need all those things. Well, if you have a big mass of cells where it shouldn't be, it's basically going to hog all the ingredients. That's going to start affecting the quality of the cells that are normal. Number 2, block nerve connections. All right, you gotta understand, your nervous system is like a spider web through you. You have connections everywhere. Well, it makes sense. If you have a mass of cells blocking some of these nerve connections, those messages aren't going to get sent. That's what your nervous system is. It's like a messenger system, like a telephone system, sending a signal from one place to another. If you've got a tumor there, sometimes those connections can be blocked. Your nervous system does more than what you think it does. It's not just there to, you don't think of just your brain and thinking when it comes to your nervous system. Everything's controlled by your nervous system. The ability to move, the ability to breathe, everything. So if you start putting cells that are going to start blocking these connections, it's not going to be good. An overloaded organ. This kind of goes along with the first one, sort of. Like if you have a tumor that develops in your pancreas, your organ, one of your organs, that organ is going to get so overloaded, arteries, veins are going to get blocked. That organ's just not going to function correctly and do what it normally needs to do. It'll affect, not only the certain patch of cells, but it also is going to affect the whole organ as a whole. This is why people with cancer, it's usually they suffer from complications due to failed organs, among anything. Failed organs because of this mass, failed organs because nerve connections aren't being made. That's usually what leads to some of the effects of there. Okay, a couple other words that you've heard of. Benign and malignant are probably not what you think either. And I know you've heard these words. If you say that a cancer is benign, usually that's like a whew, yay. It's a good thing. And the only thing that means is it just hasn't spread anywhere. I'll be honest, if you have a cell that turns cancerous and it starts growing out of control and forms this mass, but if it just doesn't go anywhere and if it stays put to the point where a doctor can kind of come in and yank it out, you're good. That's considered benign. Yes, you have cancer, but it's benign. It's not moving. It's not spreading. The problem is when it becomes something called malignant. And all that means, if you have cancer that's become malignant, that means that cancer started off in one area, but it's spread to some other area. How do you think it's going to spread? What's like the major transportation system in your body? Which type of cells? There's a certain system in your body that's kind of like a roadway. Your blood, your circulatory system.
I do.
The growth of cancer cells. Okay, top picture. You see a line of cells here. Most of them are normal, but this one's not. That one starts dividing rapidly. A tumor is forming. At this point, it's benign because it's staying right there. However, in this bottom picture, something bad is happening. Some of those cells, now remember, all of these cells are now, since it's basically they're dividing by mitosis, they're making identical cells. So all of these cells are now multiplying like crazy. One of those cells sneaks into a blood vessel, gets carried off wherever, lodges itself somewhere else. It's going to start growing into another mass somewhere else. This is why it's really common for people to start off with a certain type of cancer, like breast cancer or pancreatic cancer. But that if it's not treated in time, it can spread to other places and it turns into a different form of cancer. And that basically just means that cancer has spread from the one location to the other, and it's usually by the bloodstream. So, question? Oh, there's another word if you've heard of. The word malignant, the word metastasize is another common word describing cancer. And if a cancer has metastasized, it's pretty much the same as saying it's malignant. It's spread. So a metastasized cancer has spread as well. So Kind of the two words that kind of mean the same thing. Okay, and finally, well, how in the world does a cell basically become cancerous? And this is where, you know how you're told to avoid all those naughty things that, are harmful for you because they could cause cancer? Well, rightfully so. So my next thing is, I drew a picture of a piece of DNA. And when it all comes down to it, cells become damaged by these three things here. There's more than this, but this is just the majority of them. UV rays, tobacco smoke, radiation, all those things that you're warned to stay away from. But what exactly do those things do? Those things will head straight to your DNA. You have DNA in every one of the cells in your body. Your DNA is pretty fragile, like I said. So if that becomes damaged, if you have a portion of your DNA that becomes damaged, it's not going to make the right protein. Those things are examples of things that will damage DNA. By the way, those things are called carcinogens. Anything that is known to cause cancer is called a carcinogen, no matter what it is. It could be UV, it could be tobacco smoke, it could be radiation, it could be, I don't know. You guys have heard the news. There's a ton of things that are always being constantly tested for cancer-causing agents. You even hear about the stuff in pop that, is thought to cause cancer, be a cancer-causing agent. Anyway, it's that's what it all goes back to. In other words, if you wanted to know the root, the cause of cancer to begin with, it traces back to a mutation in your DNA. How does your DNA become mutated? Some of those things are environmental. All right, one more thing. Oop, ignore that bottom part.
What?
The other class was asking some questions.
Is that Louis Armstrong?
Lance Armstrong. They asked a question about Lance Armstrong's cancer. I actually think it's kind of neat to talk about just kind of some of the treatments that I know you guys have probably heard of. There's 3 basic ways to treat cancer. They haven't really found a way to fix the gene yet. They're working on it, but they haven't really found a way to fix the gene, the DNA yet. So these are the other ways they're treating it. Surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation therapy. Now, surgery is pretty straightforward. Let's go in there, cut it out. Cut out the bad cells. And that's pretty successful, actually. If that cancer hasn't moved anywhere and it's in one location, surgery works a lot. Chemotherapy and radiation therapy have the same general purpose, but they just use different substances to do it. The word chemotherapy, it means chemicals. Radiation therapy doesn't use chemicals. They actually use like high energy lasers, but they do the same thing. So let's say if I have cancer that's localized to my pancreas, they'll basically develop chemicals that will be sent straight to my pancreas to kill those cells in that special localized area. Same with radiation therapy. They'll aim lasers. They'll aim high energy lasers, high energy light waves to basically try to destroy those cells. Now the problem is, the problem is what?
Don't they also kill
You're going to not only be killing your bad cells, you're going to be killing some good cells. And the cells that are most susceptible are the ones that control hair.
Yeah, that's what my grandpa lost hair when he had radiation.
Yep. Those cells are just most susceptible to those kind of treatments for whatever reason. It's just the way the cells are. So basically, you're killing good cells along with bad cells, and that's why a lot of cancer patients lose their hair. They get a little sick, they're nauseated, because it affects some of your digestive system cells. Weakness. Oh, what else am I thinking of? Yeah.
If radiation causes cancer, then why does it help too?
No, it does. No, you're right. When radiation is sent to a specific localized tiny area, it's good. When you're exposed to radiation doses kind of everywhere and anywhere, bad.
So it's the same exact kind of radiation?
It's basically, exactly. It's the same kind of it's the same thing except that radiation therapy, it's for a very localized region, but it's killing your cells. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to basically be like warfare. Pretty crazy, isn't it? It is, like, it's one of those things like, wait a minute, I thought radiation was bad, but here it's being used to do something good. Yeah. Yep, when done right.
I do.
When done right. So, all right, guys, that's it. That's all I have for today. Is there any other questions?
Press the red button.
Yeah, go ahead and press that.